Hello, my name is Matt Wilhelmi. I am the VP of Consulting Partnerships at Entromy. Entromy is an organizational insights platform serving the private equity space. And today I'm really excited because I'm joined by my friend Abha DasGupta. She is the CEO and founder of Stratvy. And Abha, I'm really excited about our conversation today because we're going to start with your background, and we're going to get into some forward-looking trends that maybe you're interested in explaining and forecasting. But starting with who you are and maybe your background, could you give maybe just a brief overview of your background and expertise in private equity?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Matt, for including me in this. As you said, I'm currently the CEO of a consulting firm that does product strategy, go-to-market strategy, and I work quite often with private equity firms. But I do have 25 years plus expertise across various different industries, across FinTech, EdTech, telematics, mobile, cybersecurity. And I've led companies that are from billion-dollar publicly traded companies down to startups that are typically private equity funded. So I've now had 3 companies that I've worked with in that PE space. I've had executive roles that are typically GM roles. I've had some chief product officer roles as well. So I come from kind of a background of starting at KPMG, working my way into AOL, and then the general manager at K12, now Stride, of their international direct-to-consumer business. I then moved to a private equity-backed organization called eDriving that was really telematics and driver training. I then moved to another VC kind of firm that was a cybersecurity-based organization as their chief product and chief strategy officer. And then I moved into an organization, another private equity-backed organization in the FinTech side. And throughout all of this, I've had the pleasure of actually being able to source, do due diligence, acquire, integrate 8 different organizations into the firms that I've been working for. At AOL, I spearheaded a lot of M&A efforts as we were selling off parts of the business to European partners. And as we were doing that, setting up partnerships. At eDriving, actually acquired the majority of what our business became and acquired a B2B function in terms of driving training. And then in addition to that, telematics-based platform. At Complex, acquired several different organizations to help enhance our cybersecurity portfolio. And then ultimately we had acquired a early childhood child care development platform and integrated that into the larger context of what we were doing in education payments.
That's great. Yeah, that's a really well-rounded product background. You're touching on a lot of different deal types, a lot of different industries, and all the different stages of investments. So thank you for that. So what do you consider, maybe now that you've had all this experience as your area of expertise when it comes to these private equity transactions?
Yeah, it's a good question. I have been a bit of a jack of all trades, particularly I think when you're a startup, you are absolutely putting on multiple hats. But where I have done best, given my strategic background, certainly understanding strategically how to grow a business, how to actually enhance that portfolio, and more so over when you're talking to PE firms, you're looking for certainly typically 1-year, 2-year returns, and you're looking for very favorable EBITDAs as well. Unlike a venture capital firm that's really looking mainly for that top line growth, I'm looking at top and bottom line growth. And so typically, really where I have come in and my strength is really looking at those potential acquisition targets. So understanding the market, understanding what those growth demands are, to then determine what are those integrations or targets that are going to help us really grow the portfolio. What's the right market fit for us? Certainly doing due diligence then and breaking that down for due diligence around the product, around the engineering aspects and back-end aspects, around go-to-market, around strategy and development, even from a financial perspective, being able to do the due diligence certainly on their P&L, their business case moving forward. Creating those synergistic business cases, that's what I love, I think, the most, because that's where you get to dream big about how are we going to innovate together. Certainly understanding that market, understanding the TAM, the SAM, that trajectory, and then saying, what does that really case look like? And then on the other end, integrating, once we've acquired, how do we integrate this into our larger portfolio to have strategic significance, but more importantly, to give us growth, right? What does that growth really look like? And growth is often beyond just certainly the numbers, but how do we grow together to acquire additional customers? How are we growing together to get the right kind of personnel in the right spots, right? We're acquiring many times talent. And so really kind of soup to nuts, I've done all aspects of that deal cycle and really approached it in a way of understanding that holistically, so that you really, when you're trying to acquire an organization, you're asking the right questions for any pitfalls that might come up.
So thank you for that overview. It does sound like, the word comprehensive comes to mind, holistic. So thinking about maybe a very specific private equity deal that you were a part of, what are you moving in there to maybe solve in terms of the most critical factors? And then, when you were working on that deal, how did it work out and what factors kind of played into it?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I'd say where I felt like certainly there was the most success, but also the most synergy was at eDriving. So at eDriving, very B2C focused driver training organization, very commodity based product. Came in to really reevaluate the business, and we quickly realized it needed to be more of a B2B focus. We needed to have not only that idea of certainly training, but also a comprehensive view on compliance and having the right kind of not only curriculum, but the tools to really understand how do we increase that lifetime value of the customer? How are we going to really have a relationship here? And so really started to source in the market the right kind of organizations, companies that could really add to what we were currently doing. And two things really came to mind. One, we needed to increase certainly market share. We needed to have a business that had already B2B customers and was growing in that space and that had the right kind of training. But then secondly, quickly started to realize that we needed to be in car with those customers. So we needed to have some way to detect their driving behavior in car. And so in doing that, acquired two different organizations. One was truly that company that came with B2B customers, had the kind of driver training, and another was the telematics platform that allowed us to ingest multiple data sets and then ingest that telemetry data from the car to really detect your driving behavior. And it really did very well. We were PE backed. We were looking to actually have an exit. And so in a 2-year period, based on what our goals and objectives were, we were able to sell off that B2C side. But because we were doing so well, they kept actually the B2B side and grew that, and that grew phenomenally by techs, and then eventually did end up selling over time. But I'd say, the big things that we were looking for, as I was saying, is market timing and fit, right? Do we have the right fit? Is this the right time in the market to do this kind of acquisition? Did we have an alignment of interests, right? Not only between the private equity firm, certainly eDriving, but also the firms that we were acquiring, right? Did they see the same goals, timelines, outcomes? Were they on board for this strategic direction that we were trying to move towards? I'd say, then doing thorough due diligence, extremely important when you think of a critical factor of doing those comprehensives on the financials, on the operations, the market position, the leadership. So the one thing that it becomes the downfall is not understanding the people well enough. So really understanding from a leadership perspective, and particularly in private equity, when they're trying to acquire or have a firm be part of their portfolio, what they're looking for is already a leadership team that's already intact, right? They want this leadership team and they want them to continue to grow. So that's really important, unlike others that might be trying to come in and reorganize. It's less likely for a PE firm to do that, certainly at the jump. And then really creating that value creation strategy. So what overall is our overall plan to drive operational efficiency and revenue growth and strategic positioning? And then we talked about having that strong leadership in place and really understanding those leaders. And then ultimately between the PE firm and the acquiring, what's our exit strategy and do we know, right? So here it was very clear from our PE firm that they had a 2-year term. And that's what they were looking for, is that we're going to go acquire, and in 2 years, we want to exit. And they changed that strategy as we saw that growth, where they exited a part of the business, that B2C side, but they didn't exit fully. And so I think that was certainly the best case that I've had in any of the acquisitions, where we really grew and were able to exit certainly a piece of it, but then they continue to grow the other components, and it did very, very well.
What a fantastic story highlighting your expertise and ability to kind of begin with the end in mind, but also be confident and comfortable enough to adjust slightly based on new data and have some profitable terms with everyone involved. That's fantastic.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
appreciate you highlighting that background, Abha. I wanted to move into the future and kind of what we're working on together with this private equity panel. And so I'm curious, what excites you most about being a part of this panel, and what unique perspectives do you hope to bring to the discussions?
Yeah, so, when you really approached me with this, the first thing that everyone is going to think is, how much am I going to learn from these other panel members? I think, you've got such a stellar panel here. We're going to have a lot of engaging learning, collaborative learning. So I'm really excited to learn from them, really diverse experts from diverse industries, which is always fantastic. And then I think, being able to contribute myself, right? Being able to share these experiences that may align with some of the experiences that the panel has had, but also because I've worked across so many different industries, it's really understanding that perspective of, there's some things that are going to be kind of foundational, no matter what industry you're in, that are your gotchas, or the ones that you really need to pay attention to. And because now, as I'm consulting, and I'm consulting with, several private equity firms, being able to bring some of that knowledge forward here for the panel is, I think, going to be fantastic. And then learning, certainly, what are they seeing as the future? What are some maybe technological challenges that they're seeing? What are some areas of growth opportunity? I think those are all things that certainly I'm excited to learn about as well.
Well, I don't want to ruin everything that you plan on bringing to the panel, but I'm curious if you could maybe give a little tease in terms of a specific trend or challenge in the private equity landscape that maybe you see as something you're particularly passionate about in addressing.
Yeah, so I think, there's going to be two, and one that, everyone always speaks of, but how is technology and AI going to change how we do our deal structures, deal flows, the time to do a deal, right? And that kind of goes along with this challenge of dry powder, right? Meaning that there's an increasing competitive market, and being able to effectively invest, whether they have resourcing, capital, that's unallocated, that unallocated dry powder, right? What happens to that? And I do believe that with technology and AI, we're going to have, certainly there's a lot more competition, that's going to be in place. But I do believe that we're going to be able to automate a lot of our due diligence, our deal cycle. And that will allow a lot of PE firms to invest quicker, sooner, get in front of their competitive in the market. It also allows them to understand, I believe, that market a bit better. Where is that fit, right? There's always going to be those pressures in the market. But I do think that's going to be a big one. And then another trend that we've been seeing is around this idea of environment, social governance, this ESG, and really creating value and generating value around ESG. And we're seeing that in even the top areas of investment have been FinTech, have been in healthcare and renewable energy, right? The renewable energy is one that is interesting because it's just taken a huge shift. So I think, mainly that technology side, for me, is going to, I think, accelerate investment and accelerate the market quite a bit.
So when I hear you talk about diligence and automation, I immediately think of standardization, because you can't really automate it without it being standard. And so maybe that's something we'll get into in the panel.
Absolutely.
Okay, last question, and I appreciate your time. Looking ahead and thinking about the trends you kind of mentioned, some of the innovations you're speaking about, how do you see yourself and your team kind of being positioned to navigate these changes?
Yeah, so I do see, I think the technology and data analytics, so being able to leverage AI, leverage machine learning for the due diligence aspects and value creation. So being able to even understand, based on the data that we can now get our fingertips on, right, what does that strategic business case look forward for that synergistic case? And then certainly due diligence, as I was saying, like being able to comb through structured and unstructured data and really give us a view of what the risks are. That's where I could see certainly being able to have expertise there and being able to help as we do due diligence. The other piece is certainly, as I was talking about, different industries, is this idea of sector specialization, right? So being very vertically specialized in EdTech and FinTech, I think those are areas where I can lend a lens on where is that market going? Where do we see growth opportunities? And where do they start to blur a little bit, right? So fintech and insurance are blurring a lot into renewable energy, right? So how do these all kind of work together? Is gonna be really, really important. And then I just think, the strategic partnership aspect is something that, as we think about go to market, often PE firms start to overlook, right? Where beyond just an acquisition, how do we now strategically partner with the right folks to kind of co-invest and spread risk and maybe diversify that risk? That is an area that I have a lot of expertise in as well, but I do think it's starting to be a trend because as we get riskier and riskier in our investments, we want to be able to hedge those risks, right? So I think that's another area certainly that I see that is a trend, but also an area where I think I can help to lend some expertise as well.
Well, I'm really excited about this panel. If I wasn't already excited before, I appreciate you kind of running through your background and talking about some of the deal structures that you've been a part of. And obviously your expertise and professionalism shines through with just the way you speak about it, but also some of the interesting insights and trends that you're seeing. So I'm looking forward to the panel discussions. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for your time in recording this intro video and obviously also in being a part of the panel. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much, Matt. And again, thank you for thinking of me to be a part of this. I appreciate it.